My talk is going to, I think, follow up quite nicely on what has been so far said. And partly, I think we are all facing a situation of transformation. It is, I think, part of human nature to assume that what we are facing now is unique and that we're entering a new stage in human history. But if we look a little bit at the history of Europe or the West, we will see that there are ways of changes and things oscillate quite frequently. And crisis always is a beginning of a new stage and a new development. So I would like to try and be quite positive about the fact that we are facing a crisis today and argue that it invites us to reflect on where we have gone right, but mostly on where we've gone wrong. Trying to explain the reemergence of nationalism, I am not unaware of the really historical, devastating aspects of nationalism, but I think it was already mentioned that nationalism is also the grounds of self-determination, modern democracies, the welfare state. Questions of identity have always been dealt within the framework of the nation-state in modern times. Kings and queens didn't care who they govern over. Modern democracies need a people to represent. So nationalism and democracy, or modern nation-states, were born based on these two grounds of self-rule and national determination that together created Europe and much of the modern world. So what I'm trying to do now, very briefly, hope I will not irritate you too much, because maybe I'll say some things people would not like to hear, but I'm looking for a pattern in the crisis. It's very easy to reduce crises to particular cases. Say, this is because of that explanation. Hillary Clinton wasn't elected because she's a woman or because she was part of the Washington elites. If you look at Brexit, you can give sorts of ad hominem explanations. I'm trying to look whether there is a pattern that explains some of the present crisis, and I will try to offer an explanation that goes, I think, over and above the particular analysis. And always there will be an exception, right? You would say, well, in my country it doesn't work that way, but I think it's good enough for us to understand that there is a common ground and to look at that common ground in order for us to be productive in offering a solution. So I would offer 7 points that I think are motivating many of the crises in the West. And I'm talking only about the West because things in the West and in the developing world are rather different. The first one and I think this is something that has not been discussed enough in recent years, are the growing social and economic gaps. It's true, it is now a major issue. But if you look at the data, and we'll see them in a moment, the gaps have been growing since the 80s. And if we would have looked at them more carefully earlier, I think we would have seen a pattern of the effects of globalization that many people didn't like to see. And maybe something could have been done earlier. But there is something more important than the social and economic gaps, and that's pessimism. If you look at the way people perceive their life, and I will soon argue that this is a class issue, the middle classes now believe, and they are not wrong about it, that their children are going to be less well off than they are. This is a massive change in the way people perceive the future. If you can see young people, there is a very interesting McKinsey report showing that in most of the OECD countries, young people are going to be struggling with making a living, and are going to be poorer than their parents. So in my generation, my parents were sure, and they were right statistically, that we will do better than them, my generation. That we will be more educated, well-to-do, and able to have more opportunities than they would. But now, things have changed. So people look ahead with an anxiety, and that's I think the most important part, a justified anxiety about their children and their well-being. There is, and I think it was mentioned here, a growing democratic deficit. People distrust the political order partly because they feel that they cannot influence the way things are. So there is a sense of helplessness. And maybe you'll be surprised that I'm saying that, but I think part of the upheaval now is actually a proof to people that they can change the way things are. And that is democratically very important. It's not that the people who are elected are necessarily Democrats, they often aren't. But the feeling that the people can change the way things are is essential, that people will believe that they should be and could be political agents. If you can't change, why play the game? So now I think we are seeing people that have been feeling excluded from the political camp saying we have power. If you have power, you need to use it wisely. But if you don't have power, it doesn't matter what you do. So that is a blessing, and it comes with a price. The second thing is the disillusionment with the assumption that we're just going to have an economy that keeps on growing endlessly, and the economy is going to trickle down, and the middle class are going to get better. Actually, everybody's going to get better. This sense of progress is now being questioned. And many people feel things are getting worse. Now, this is not necessarily objectively true. But comparatively speaking, to go back to the gaps, the poor today, again, I'm talking about the West, the poor today are better off than they were certainly in the 30s and the 40s. But when they compare themselves to the well-off, they feel their situation has gotten worse. And unfortunately, people measure their well-being on a comparative basis. There is a very important article on equality by an American philosopher, Harry Frankfurt, and it starts with a quote, and a person asks, "How are your children?" And the answer is, "Compared to what?" So the comparison is not insignificant. You can't just tell people, well, you know, your parents didn't have high school education and you have gone to college. If the fact that you have gone to college didn't give you the power to have a stable job, pension, and a life chance that you are satisfied with. And I think this is maybe the most frustrating thing for young people around the world. And the crisis is motivated a lot by that crisis of the inability of education to close social and economic gap. We grew in a world, again, my generation, that education can fix everything. Give people more education and they'll be better off. Guess what? We are in the most educated age ever, and the gaps are growing. But not only that, people who went to college and got a degree can't find a job. And sometimes if they find a job, the job is not paying enough to make a living. So there is a new class of, and a growing class of educated poor. And the educated poor are the most frustrated class ever, because they've done everything right, and they can't make a living, and they can't buy an apartment, and they don't know what will be the future of their children. They know they're going to be poorer than their parents, and their children could be poorer than them. So all these people are now questioning really the paradigms that we have been sort of advancing, we, I think, the liberal camp, the progressive camp, the global camp, for quite a long time. And these people are now saying, it doesn't work for me, it doesn't work for my neighbor, so what's going on? We should change things. So I'm not saying we're changing things in the right direction, but I'm saying there is a great urge for change. And I think you look at this, it's a sort of a wall from somewhere, I don't know exactly where, but tuition fees lie. The next crisis in the United States is going to be tuition and student loans, because you can't deliver. So when you can't deliver, people ask themselves, why should I trust you? And I should say this is an honest and important question. Unfortunately, the people who ask this question, who are now protesting, are often seen as populists, as people who have, narrow-minded bigots, and there are narrow-minded and bigots people among them, hateful people motivated by a wrong and misguided understanding of the reality. They are actually telling us something that is true and something that the elites were not ready to listen to until the last events. So this is why I'm saying that, in a way, this crisis is a victory of the people who were silenced. They are used by some elites, they are used by other forces, but these people are now saying something we should listen to. And maybe the most important political tool now is listening to new forces and new voices in the political arena. So here are the people who are crying out. This is I didn't draw this graph, it's a graph done by an economist called Milanovic. And it looks at the global income growth. Actually, he has a new one until 2012, but it doesn't matter. What you can see, and this is divided globally. Globalization did raise life standards of the poorest people in the poorest countries in the world. It sometimes doubled the income, because if you earned $1 a day, now you earn $2 a day, maybe $5 a day. But look at it's called the elephant curve. You can understand why. So look at the place where things are getting worse. These are the middle classes in the West that from the 80s, so to speak, depending on different countries, are actually seeing a reduction in their life standards and in their ability to have a decent income. And on the other side of the graph, this track of the elephant going up is the 1%, 5%, 6%, doesn't matter what it is, but it's the global elite. So the people who are seeing a decline in their ability to make a decent living, and therefore in their social status, and therefore in their health, for the first time, longevity in America is down. We have never thought that in the Western world we can witness a period where longevity will become questionable. But with the crisis now, with the opioids, with the unemployment, with the changing economy, there are regions, and it's a geographical matter, there are regions where longevity is on decline. So the complaint is, I think, an important one, and it touches the most basic things people care about. Their children, their health, their pension. People are seeing all those things that they have trusted being questioned. I'm sorry, the red cannot be read very well. So those people who are now experiencing the crisis are mostly the people who, on this debate between globalism and nationalism, are more to the national side. And what I urge us to do is not to think of them as irrational or as people who misunderstand their position, but to think about this phenomena as an outcome of circumstances. And one of the things that made me think about it is looking at election maps. And all the election maps in the world, by the way, now look just the same. The megacities, where there's more education, younger people go to the more global, democratic, progressive side. The rural areas go to the conservative, radical, extreme right. Now, with your permission, I will not assume that the people in the cities are smarter than the people in the rural areas, or that they have some extra knowledge that makes them more able to analyze the political situation. I would assume that this is the way we make decisions. When we ask ourselves, where should we be placed? And by the way, I would like to claim that we are never placed only in one position. And over a lifetime, we change our positions depending on the circumstances. Where we are positioned depends very much on our analysis of our risks and opportunities, of our identity, of our class, and our social status and self-esteem. And the fact that we have growing groups of individuals that are now pushed more to the national side is a result of narrowing opportunities, growing risk, lower social status, lower self-esteem. If that is true, if there is nothing natural, some people are naturally more dead and some people are naturally more dead, then the question is not about people. The question is about policies. And pushing people from one side to the other is a question of what kind of policies you adopt, which for me, it wasn't mentioned, but I'm a political activist and I've been for many years a political player and a member of the government. I always look for policies, because just saying this is the way things are is not very effective. I think the question is, what kind of policies can change patterns of voting? And we know people move. I mean, Trump was elected because people who voted for Obama moved to Trump. They're not going to stay there forever. They could be moved back. People around the world do not have one opinion. Their opinion, and that is a rational thing to do, change according to where they are and how they perceive the situation. Globalism failed many people. It couldn't replace the nation state. It couldn't answer a lot of the human needs the nation state answered. The nation state is not ideal. Maybe it's not here forever. Maybe someday there will be something totally different. Maybe we will all be governed by artificial intelligence. Who knows? For the time being, alternatives are rare, and nation states, even for collaboration, even for the revival of Europe, even for ecological matters, are the building blocks that we should work with. And I'm wholeheartedly against this, just dismantling something we don't know how to replace. And the nation state is still very functional. So I would end with a word of optimism. A lot of people believe that the things I have described have pushed a lot of people to the right, to the extreme right, and nationalism is taking over. And in this respect, we are going to become more and more extreme, some say populist, and we are sort of undermining the way modern democracies work. I think we are actually going to see a rebalancing act where more and more politicians who are now aware, and this is why I welcome the disruptive nature of the present crisis, are going to rethink their policies and make a move. And the move is going to be not to the extreme, but for the center. Two examples. You might not like them, but one is from the right and one is from the left. Boris Johnson, I wouldn't vote for Boris Johnson, but I carefully listened to his first speech at the House. And what he said first thing, he looked at Jeremy Corbyn and said, I'm going to steal some of your ideas. I'm going to be for the welfare state. I'm going to work for pensions. I'm going to lower taxes on houses. I'm going to take the social route because I understand who my voters are. And then he said something which is also quite uncommon for the right. He said, I'm going to make England green. He gave an ecological promise. I don't know if it's going to, early days. But, he wanted to make this as one of his first statements in the House because he knows where the young audience is. The young audiences are there. So it's social solidarity, green policies, and then, obviously, Brexit. So it's this melange of right and left, democratic and conservative, progressive and more sort of traditional ideas that creates this kind of a balance. It's sort of a left nationalism that is becoming popular. Look at what happened in Denmark. Mette Frederiksen, what did she do? She comes from the left, but she took the right voters because she had a more clear vision of immigration. And she was very clear. She said, sorry, am I doing something wrong? No? Israel, everybody under the table when you hear it, but you're all very quiet, so okay. Okay, I have 2 minutes, so I think you'll. So Mette Frederiksen took the position from the left to the center and grabbed the votes of the right. And she did it because she understood she had to take a more national position while making a very clear commitment to welfareism and to green policies. I think people in both Democrats and Republicans in America are going to move to the center. Republicans are going to have more, I would call it national policies about immigration, borders. Bernie Sanders is now saying, I'm the real patriot. And I should say, he used to say it in the 80s, now he's coming back with this claim. I'm the real patriot. We are the patriots. We defend America. And on the other hand, you see many of the conservatives talking about social justice, taxation. This is not a coincidence that today or yesterday Macron talked about taxing Google. So the political map is shaking. We're going to see a new political map soon. It's going to be very much aware of the ideas embedded in nationalism, putting our country first, not as superior, but first, taking care of the well-being of our citizens is going to be a major aspect of that melange, together with social welfare, together with green policies. And I think if we will look back in 5 years, we will see that some sort of liberal nationalism, as I called it in my first book, or left-wing progressive nationalism, as I call it now, would be the order of the day. So that's the optimistic version of what is happening now. I do see signs that it's about to happen, but I think, being people with influence in our societies, we also have a role of bringing it about, of being aware of the way the elites, maybe unintentionally, to be generous, betrayed some of their duties to their peoples, and turn back and see how we're going to improve societies in order to make things better and in order to allow more people to share the opportunities we promised them they will have. Right now, it's a challenge. If we meet this challenge, maybe we will be able to create a better political future for all of us. Thank you very much.